This is the Digging for Truth podcast, presented by the Associates for Biblical Research, demonstrating the historical reliability of the Bible through archaeological and biblical research.
Have you ever seen in the news or in an article online about some major biblical relic that's been found?
A group of Chinese and Turkish evangelical explorers claim this is Noah's Ark. The structure they've located is near the top of Mount Ararat in Turkey.
Her find also provided independent confirmation of earlier evidence establishing wheel-like formations on both coasts of the Red Sea, in accordance with descriptions in the biblical record.
Using contacts we cannot disclose and methods we cannot disclose, we got to the forbidden sites.
How many people have been where you were and have seen what you've seen?
Well, there's been several that have been in the dig and seen the cutouts, the cross holes, but I'm the only one that has been in the chamber with the Ark of the Covenant.
I don't know about you, but I've found myself wondering about some of these biblical mysteries, going down rabbit trails on Wikipedia and YouTube. Was this thing found? Is it a hoax? How do you know who to trust when everyone seems to be an expert? Henry Smith is here with me, and maybe you can help talk about some of these things.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Noah's Ark. Has it been found?
Yeah.
That's one of those big mysteries. It'd be nice if it was, but I remember, was it 10, 15 years ago? There was this video of these guys going on Mount Ararat. They were inside the Ark.
This dark wooden room could rewrite history. The people who found it claim it's a cabin inside Noah's Ark.
We are like 99.9% it is Noah's Ark. Yeah.
A team of Chinese and Turkish explorers say they discovered the giant boat in 2009. It's buried in ice more than 4,000 metres above sea level on top of Mount Ararat in Turkey.
It made national news, and then later it came out, that it was staged, but, at the time, it was making actual national TV news.
Yeah, there's an interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really important question. There's a layers to your question, too. One of the things that ABR historically has wanted to do was try to help people in the church be able to discern these things by doing our own research. So if we do research on a particular subject, or even just generally, if it's something we haven't specifically, really dug into, just sort of urging people to be careful when they see stuff out on the internet. The irony of the age we live in is we live in an age of information and more misinformation than any people in the history of the world, right?
Yeah.
So this is like the dual-edged sword of the age that we're in. And so it's difficult sometimes. You get excited. You're a Christian. You got a Facebook account, and something comes through your feed. They discovered Noah's Ark. Okay, so go back 10 or 15 years when that moment in time came, and that thing flashes across your Facebook feed. You're a Christian. Oh, I found Noah's Ark. You have an instant reaction to it, and you share it.
Yeah.
It's understandable, in some ways, right? You just share it because you're maybe a little impulsive, but for positive reasons, because you're excited. It looks plausible. Maybe it looks plausible, right? And then we find out later that it's not, and then you go back and probably hope that or wish that you hadn't shared it because it's not true information. So the idea here is to help the church, people in the church, to vet these kind of claims. That's part of what we do. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we joke about it. We call it, pseudo-archaeology or tabloid archaeology. I would say the general principle for the churchmen and ladies is when you see a claim about something that supports the Bible, just hit the pause button and do some more research and investigate it, vet it. Don't share it. Don't get overly excited. Don't get underly. Is that a word? So sort of the general advice I would give is to just sort of stay in the middle on it and kind of see if you're interested, pursue it. Come to our website. Maybe we've talked about it before, like the Noah's Ark scenario. So I think it's important for Christians to understand these big sensational stories that we've got to be careful. Just be careful about them. So in the case of Noah's Ark, There's been a whole bunch of different theories out there. There's the one theory was in Iran. There's a couple competing mountains, right, in the mountains of Ararat, because the biblical text doesn't say it's actually on Mount Ararat proper, the mountain that we call Mount Ararat today, but in the mountains. Urartu is the region that it was called in antiquity. So, we've published some materials on our website sort of trying to put together arguments of where it might have landed based on historical evidence, based on eyewitness accounts and all that. Mm-hmm. But even then, we have to be sort of tentative about it because it's a shifty, mysterious thing, Noah's Ark. It seems like every time somebody thinks they've got something nailed down, it's sort of like this, it's like nailing Jell-O to the wall. It's a very interesting phenomenon. The mountains are located in politically sensitive regions, during the Cold War. It was on the old Soviet border. So nobody from the West could get in there. And then, there's all kinds of different scenarios. So as a general rule, I mean, it's exciting to me. We'd all love to see Noah's Ark discovered or some proof or at least a remnant of the Ark.
It'd be a big deal. It would be.
It would be an enormous deal. Just think about that, because most of the world rejects the story as historical. Certainly in the church, there's a lot of people that think it's a regional flood or a local flood or a mythological story that's intended to tell us some kind of truth, so you have all those competing kind of things. So I hope that's helpful as just a general sketch of the way we ought to approach such things. And we do want to approach them rigorously. Like I said, we've done some research on Noah's Ark. Rick Lancer, in particular, is one of our staff members, has written a whole series of articles. He's trying to put together an investigative puzzle, which I think is the right approach without the sensational claims.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. I've got a kind of a list here of a bunch of things. Maybe we can kind of talk about a bunch of them. Now, just still with Noah's Ark, like if you search Noah's Ark, like one of the ones that comes up, it sure looks like a ship. What is one that is someone claims it to be? I mean, it's in the shape of a boat, but I think it might be a natural occurrence, but it looks really weird. It looks like a boat. It looks like the base of the boat, and it's in Turkey, I believe. But even for a layman to discern that, it's just like, well, look at that picture. That's it. It's got to be it, And so it can be hard to discern that sometimes.
Yes, the exercise of wisdom is important, I think, is just like, think about it. It's a picture. Okay, now it could be part of a larger mosaic of evidence that points to a discovery. Mm-hmm. I mean, you don't just immediately dismiss it, but to immediately accept it. It's just a photograph. Mm-hmm. And beyond the fact that photographs can be manipulated, you have nowadays, that factor.
Yeah.
But even if you just took the photograph at face value, what is it? Mm-hmm. It's one photograph. It's that's just not enough proof. You put together an argument that involves a lot more material, a lot more evidence. Mm-hmm. Typically, what gets proven by one photo, So there's a principle for people to think about, I think. Okay, maybe it looks like it points to something, but what else is there associated with the photograph? Who took the photograph? When was it taken? Where was it taken? All those kind of basic questions that you would ask. You think of it maybe like in courtroom terms. You know what I mean? How do you put together a circumstantial case for anything? Mm-hmm. You wouldn't just bring in one photograph and say, that's it. Yeah. Right? You would bring in witnesses. You would have scientific evidence if it was available to you, historical claims, documentation, those kind of things.
Yeah.
So
another one that I think many Christians would love to know where's Mount Sinai? Has that been discovered yet? If you look it up, someone says they've found it, but you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, wow, what a it's like Noah's Ark. It's the same kind of can of worms, isn't it? A little bit more, I think, concrete because the time period is much closer to us.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So the Exodus events are
thousands of years after.
After Noah's Ark. So the further you get back in time, the harder it is to corroborate in a kind of historical material. And some of that is from, the world that then was, as Peter called it. I mean, the Ark is the only artifact left over from the pre-flood world. But in the case of the Exodus, we have tradition, we have the biblical text, of course. tradition, like in the southern Sinai, we have St. Catherine's Monastery, which is where the traditional location of Mount Sinai is placed. That tradition goes back to 4th century AD. So that's still 1,800 years after the fact. And there's been a critique of that. It's too far off the route. The mountain's too high. Those kinds of critiques have been put against it. But that's a candidate. That's been a candidate that's been discussed. There's the Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia theory, which is out there. The argument is that Sinai was in Midian, and Midian extended into Saudi Arabia. Paul seems to associate the mountain with Arabia in the book of Galatians. You have the question there, though, of, is he talking about Arabia as we know it now, or what did he think of it back then? But the point of that is simply you have people that advocate that position, and then a variety of different locations within the Sinai Peninsula itself. We've done some research. We've actually gone there years ago and found a mountain there that's in the sort of north-central Sinai that we think is a candidate, but we haven't been able to complete the research because of security in the Middle East and various other stumbling blocks. Some put it more over in the eastern part of the Sinai, Midwest part of the Sinai. So, you could probably find at least 10 to 15 different proposals that are floating out there. So the question is, which one is the right one? Again, though, I would just encourage wisdom and caution, particularly when, somebody produces photographs or a video. You have the classic, here's pictures of chariot wheels found at the bottom of the Gulf of Aqaba, which is near, which is part of the Mount Sinai in Arabia hypothesis.
Okay.
And so you'll see those floating out on the internet, and somebody will put the picture up. Look, it's the chariot wheels, and they're wheels in water.
Yeah.
So do they look like Egyptian chariot wheels? People have looked at it and said, no way, they do not. But even if they did look like Egyptian chariot wheels, all you have is a photograph of some wheels in water. Where did the photograph come from? How was it taken? Was it taken under controlled scientific conditions in terms of an expedition? What's the origin of the photograph? Those are very reasonable questions I think that people should ask when they see those things. I mean, I've seen interactions in, Facebook and places like that where people see that photo and they're just completely convinced those are the wheels from the chariots that went into the sea, when the Israelites crossed
the Red Sea.
And you can't talk them out of it.
Yeah. I actually just saw a Facebook post recently that they were talking about that, and there was a bunch of different pictures of wheels and chariots and
yes.
And so is there a definitive location, a Red Sea crossing that has been, or is that another?
No.
Okay.
Yes, it is another disputed thing, right? So, and again, these are very exciting things that we really want to discover. We've done research ourselves. Dr. Wood, Gary Byers, staff members have written articles and gone over to the Sinai and put forth their own proposals. But there's no consensus. Now, I should say, when we think about the idea of consensus, there's always somebody out. Nothing is a 100% consensus per se. But what I mean here is there's enough voices of disagreement that it doesn't even come anywhere close to a consensus.
Okay.
Where you're not talking about 95%, you're talking about, 30% of people think this, and another 20 people think that, and another 10 think this. And so you have all these competing truth claims, So you have the crossing over at the Gulf of Aqaba, the Saudi Arabia, part of the Saudi Arabia hypothesis.
Okay.
You have the main Red Sea. If you look at a map, they're like two giant fingers wrapped around the Sinai Peninsula.
Okay.
All right, the one that's on the west is the Red Sea. So some people think that's where the crossing took place in the wider body of water. Our theory, working hypothesis, I should say, has been it's up more north where there was a series of lakes in antiquity where the Suez Canal is now. Certainly.
Now, doesn't the text say Sea of Reeds? It doesn't say Red Sea, does it? It says
yes.
And is that more of a modern versus antiquity description?
Well,
or is that a debated thing?
That's a great question. I'm just going continue not to fully answer your questions, Luke, because yes, in the Hebrew it says the Yam Suf.
Okay.
That's the word that's used. So literally it means Sea of Reeds. And so, but it was translated in the Greek Septuagint as Red Sea. Okay. And it's used, referring to the crossing point. And the term in the New Testament is definitely Red Sea.
Okay.
Okay. So, which we have to take the witness of the New Testament very seriously, right? They're not incompatible. Somehow they cohere, but we have to figure out how they cohere together. Mm-hmm. So, is it the Red Sea as we know it today, which is historically the way that people have kind of thought about it? Or is there something more nuanced going on here in terms of the term Yam Suf? And then to cloud things further, the term Yam Suf is also used to refer, I think, to the Gulf of Aqaba in other texts, like at the time of Solomon. Oh. So, now maybe the term had sort of morphed in the way that it was used because the time between Solomon and Moses is 400 or 500 years. What do you do with that? Is that a contradiction? I wouldn't say it's a contradiction. I'd just say it's a problem that's not fully resolved. Mm-hmm. And I'm speaking in general terms here, partly because I haven't resolved these issues myself.
Yeah.
Which actually makes it easier to talk about in some ways because, I could just sort of put out the ideas out there that are...
You don't have to defend a position.
Yeah. I haven't been able to take enough time to study it. I'm aware of these other views. And, I lean in certain directions. I think we do that.
Now, you were saying about the Sea of Reeds versus Red Sea.
Yes.
In another, this is related to that, but I know I was looking up something once, and I was looking at an older translation. I don't know if it was the King James or just another variation, but it was referring to the region of Abyssinia. And I was like, Abyssinia? I don't know where that is. But then in the NIV and newer translations, it's Ethiopia. And then if you look it up, like, Ethiopia was called Abyssinia at the time when this translation was coming out. So could that even be another thing that's going on where it was referred to for one thing at one period of time, and then as the text was copied or written down or whatever, they put, this is referring to this place, so we're going to use this term. Is that another possibility? Yeah,
especially with translations, you see that actually in the Septuagint, the Greek Septuagint, name places, sometimes in Egypt, the old Hebrew name place was updated in the Greek to relate it to the name of the city at that time.
Okay.
Right? I mean, even if you think about the name Egypt, Egypt is not Egypt, it's Mitzrayim.
Okay.
Is the name of the country because he's the son of Ham. Right? So when you just think about name places and how they're updated. So in the Hebrew, that's what it is, Mitzrayim, right? We translate it as what?
As Egypt.
As Egypt. Because that's the name came from the Greeks. So to your point, geography is an interesting thing. And then if you go down to English translations, then you even have more. Because they're trying to figure out how do we communicate to the modern reader in English what this place is. Because if you use an old name, maybe it won't connect with the person who's reading it. So, you're trying to stay faithful to the underlying text because that's what you want to do in translation, but you also have an audience, a target audience that you're trying to communicate with. So to your point about Abyssinia or Ethiopia, that's a possibility. I would think that those kinds of things, I guess they muddy the water even more, I think is part of, what you're getting at.
Yeah. With specifically Sea of Reeds versus the Red Sea. Yeah. It's all kind of in the same region, but Sea of Reeds might refer to, and I don't know, I'm just guessing, but might refer to a specific upper part of the grander Red Sea or something like that.
Right. So probably a place we would want to go that would be more reliable is probably like Egyptian texts that are closer to the time period of the Exodus. That would probably be more helpful, and some scholars like James Hoffmeyer have done that. And he puts the crossing up in that northern part where the Gulf of Suez is now, the Suez Canal.
Okay.
And him and our colleague, Dr. Wood, are in agreement generally that that's the geography that's being described. But others disagree with that perspective.
Yeah. And are there chariot wheels up there?
No chariot wheels.
Okay.
No evidence of any of that. I in my view, identifying the body of water is probably as far as we're ever going to get with that. I don't think we're ever going to find any artifacts associated with the crossing itself. I mean, it's just too far removed. Water is too destructive. You know what I mean? It's just, I mean, it's impossible. In my view, it's just almost utterly impossible. So we have to depend on the historical, the geographical, and the archaeological data, I think. Specifically to biblical text, where does it put us as we go through it? Now, of course, Christians disagree about where the text is telling us that these sites are. If it was more clear, I shouldn't say it's not clear. Inherently, the scriptures are clear, but the passage of time fogs our view of it. Let me say it that way.
Okay.
So especially when it comes to, the Sinai desert from 1,400 and some odd years ago.
A vast wilderness.
Yes.
That's full of mountains, referring back to Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of them.
Yes. Yeah. So, but the general rule of thumb here for our friends listening is, if these things are interesting to you, you should pursue the study of them. But just be careful in terms of the sensational claims that are out there. And just exercise wisdom and care as you walk through the arguments and try to figure out. It's exciting to think about where Mount Sinai is, because if you find the mountain, you say Moses was here.
Yeah.
That God came down from this mountain and mountain shook. That's powerful stuff experientially to know that this place is where these momentous events took place. That's why we look for them.
Yeah.
And why people get excited about them. But they can also become idols, and we have to be careful, I think. So I get excited too, but
I'm thinking about it now. Would there be even anything up there? Once you figure out what the mountain is, like, I wouldn't think that there would necessarily be any archaeological evidence at the top. There might be something in, at the base where they camped for a while, but there probably isn't even that much evidence to point to anyway.
No, that's the problem is that the Israelites are nomadic travelers at this point. So, and their whole time in the deserts that way, they didn't build any cities, they didn't have any permanent. I mean, they had the tabernacle, but they would pack that up and move it.
Yeah.
So.
And their shoes didn't even wear out.
Yeah. Well,
so there wouldn't be leftover, not that would last a few thousand years.
Sandals in the desert, right? Yeah. So, and in fact, that's been a skeptical argument. Let's explore that just for a second. There hasn't been any evidence of all these people wandering through the desert. You people are out to lunch on this whole Exodus thing. Well, what kind of evidence would you expect to find from people who are traveling through the desert, living as nomads in tents?
Probably not much.
Yeah. So the logic of that is it doesn't really hold up very well. And so the likelihood of finding anything at a potential mountain is probably pretty slim to none, I would think. So, but that's just the nature of it. Once the Israelites get into Canaan and they start settling in and they start building cities, now we've got infrastructure, pottery and architecture and those kind of things that we can look for. But the time in the desert, we have nil for that.
Yeah.
So, and that's just the nature of the beast with that.
Yeah. Another probably top 10, if not top 5 of archaeological finds that people want to find or say they know where it is the Ark of the Covenant. And you
want me to reveal the secret today, Luke?
Yeah. Where is it?
I don't know.
Okay. No one's found it?
No. Indiana Jones, maybe. Yeah. Which really,
is Tanis? Is that Tanis, Egypt? Is that one of the candidates for possibility? Or?
Well, that's how they thread that story.
Yeah,
and it is interesting. It has this historical kernel to it because when Shishak attacked Jerusalem and ransacked the temple, he went back to Tanis because he had I think it was a capital there, I'm not sure, or headquarters of some kind there.
Okay.
So in the Indiana Jones story, they play off of that historical kernel.
So there is a nugget there.
There's a nugget. That's why they do the whole thing at Tanis, where they find where Indiana Jones finds the Ark. But the reason they connect it up there, it's very interesting. Another interesting little nugget is if I remember right, Shishak they found in a sarcophagus a lot of silver, which typically wasn't the case for the pharaohs, a lot of gold that they would find.
Okay.
So the theory was, well, maybe the silver came from the temple because they ransacked the temple. Again, little breadcrumbs that excite the imagination, but you can't really put anything on it. So anyway, in that whole famous scene in the movie, that's where they get that from. So there is they kind of take that historical kernel there with it.
One other one, because I know I've done the rabbit trail trying to figure out the theories and where people think it is. One of the other ones is that, well, it's under the Temple Mount, under the foundation stone. So the foundation stone is the stone where the temple was and now is the Dome of the Rock.
Yeah.
But you can see pictures online of underneath. There's a staircase under and then goes under the rock, and there's like a prayer room that's got carpets there where Muslims go and pray. The one of the theories is, well, there's another chamber in there, and that's where it was hidden. And I've actually seen some guy claims to have found it. Maybe not under the foundation stone, but it was somewhere else. He found it in a cave. But then, of course, he couldn't get it out. It's then there was a collapse, and so he's like, I know where it is, but there's no.
I can't get to it.
Yeah,
I can't show you. I know exactly where it is.
Yeah,
yeah. So those things sort of excite the imagination, right? And then it seems with that kind of thing, especially the Ark of the Covenant, there's all these different directions you go where people get excited, and then there's always this closed door. Mm-hmm. It seems like what is there? 30 different theories about the location or something? I don't know. Mm-hmm. Few years ago, Gary Byers put a list together. It was like 26. I'm sure it's more than that now. Mm-hmm. And 26, it's always a closed door. Even the Ethiopian church is said to have it. They claim to have it, right?
Yeah.
Is that right? You know something about that.
I do know a little bit about it. Well, before we get to that, but doesn't actually the Bible, there is a point at which when it disappears, right?
Jeremiah?
Something like that. But
yes.
It was around during the first temple period, but it seems to have gone missing around the time or before when Jerusalem was destroyed, right? So there is at least a historical kind of, it hasn't been seen since this point.
Yeah. Yeah, so the rabbit trail the breadcrumbs kind of end. Mm-hmm. So
but I always thought that was interesting too, because the Ark of the Covenant was not in the temple when Jesus would go to worship there, and when the priests were there, and when
at least as far as we know, anyway, right?
And
that's the way it appears.
Yeah, so it was an empty room when Zechariah was doing his priestly duties. John the Baptist's dad goes there, and then gets the visit from Gabriel. Holy of Holies would have been empty. That kind of blew my mind, even to think of that it had gone missing.
Probably a theological meaning you can draw out of that. You know what I mean? Sort of like. Because Israel never really establishes itself as a nation state again. I mean, they do during the Maccabean period briefly, you know what I mean? But after the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, it's sort of this, they're not in exile. Mm-hmm. They're in exile in Babylon for a period. Mm-hmm. They come back, but they're in exile.
Yeah.
You know
they're under someone else's control.
Yeah, yeah. So there's this sort of sense of that's going on there. So you can kind of see how it makes sense of its disappearance, and of course, this is all anticipating the coming of Jesus, right? But anyway,
that adds to the big mystery, because it may have been purposely hidden because of the invasions that were coming to keep it safe.
Yes,
and then that adds to wonder what happened to it. And you were mentioning Ethiopia, so Ethiopia does have this long tradition that the Queen of Sheba, who visited King Solomon, they claim that. She became one of his wives, and then Solomon gave, or somehow to keep it safe, to their son, who then became one of the first kings of the Aksumite Empire, or something like that. But the Aksumite Empire actually was around during the time of the Roman Empire. And so the Ethiopian church has this long tradition of, we have the Ark of the Covenant. And I got the chance I visited Aksum, and it's in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. They have this special chapel that is actually the most recent chapel that was built in the 50s. Then they've got this older one that was built in the 1400s. And so we got to go in there. And I mean, it's an interesting structure because it's really old, but they pulled back the curtain and hey, this is the old Holy of Holies. We got a little tour by the monk. Yeah. Or it was a deacon who was leading us around. And then there's an even older site that he was this is 1700 years old. This was the first place where it was. And then I think even before then, I think it was in Lake Tana, which is another place in Ethiopia. But Ethiopia has a very long tradition of they've had it in their possession during that time. And now the chapel that houses it, there's only one monk who's allowed to go in. And he's the only one who can see it. No one else can get in. He can't come out. Or maybe he can come out, but just for periodic things. But like it's his sole duty to be, the monk that's dedicated to the Ark. So no one can verify it. But it is a fascinating compound, and I don't know of many of the other claims, but this one certainly seems to have the longest tradition.
Yeah.
And especially the entire Ethiopian Orthodox Church has, I know that they have replicas of it in some of the other churches. So like if you're part of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which they even have some of their own scriptures that have extra books and some other things, but that's a part of their grander tradition. And it's really fascinating.
It is fascinating. And then again, though, there's a dead end, isn't there?
Yeah.
So we're trying to figure out, is the Ark of the Covenant still around? And you have this tradition, so that's worth investigating. Like that's part of a trail of evidence that you would take into account if you're trying to figure it out. But then you run into this sort of, thing, there's only one person that has it and we have it and nobody else gets to see it. Well, what are you supposed to do with that? Part of you goes, well, how are we supposed to believe that? Like show us the money kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Of course, you want to have respect for their tradition. They have. I'm sure they have reasons why they've
got something in there. Whether it's a replica or something else.
Right. So it's fascinating. It's interesting, but it's a strange dead end. A little bit like Noah's Ark is too. The two arks, right? Mm-hmm. It's just sort of it keeps you watching. Mm-hmm. Wait for it.
People dedicate a lot of time to it.
A lot of time to it, right? But you never quite get there. So, and it's not to say, obviously, we believe these things existed and they're recorded in the Bible correctly and all that. But as far as finding them goes, we never seem to quite get there. Mm-hmm. So what do you do with that? Well, I don't know.
Keep just watching, I guess. But I guess your point is be careful with claims that are out there.
Yeah, I think that's the word you come back to. It's like the Ethiopian angle is interesting, but you can only go so far with it. And, it doesn't hold up to a courtroom case, like what kind of evidence we have. At least with something like, say, the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, that's
at least the Turin Church, rolls the thing out every 20 or 30 years for people to look at.
So that's another interesting point. So, what do you do with things that do exist that have a long history, a long claim? There's a lot of relics that are in European churches. I don't know how many pieces of the cross exist in these churches across Europe. I found a quote. John Calvin said that he joked that if you linked all of the pieces of the true cross, that's what it's called, then you would have a shipload of stuff. And then, worth of wood. There was someone else who did it, a French archaeologist, it looks like, who also did another calculation, and he said no, based on all the known pieces, you calculate the area of the wood, and then you multiply it, and then try and what would the size of the cross be? And he's like, no, it actually would be a fragment of, what the actual cross is. I don't know. I haven't done the maths, but there certainly do seem to be a lot of churches, if you look it up, in Europe that have a piece of the cross and have a nail, from the cross.
I've seen those before too. Yep.
And I don't know how much, but it seems like a lot of that tradition starts from around the time of Constantine, when he became emperor, and Helena, his mother, went to Jerusalem, and she claims to have found the cross because she found Golgotha, and that's where the Church of the Sepulchre is now built.
Yes.
But because she was there, she found the cross, the true cross, and then broke up pieces. And then I think they actually have the sign too, that King of the Jews. It's in 3 languages because there is one, and if you look up on Wikipedia or anything, just look up relics, and just even ones that are related to Jesus.
Yes.
They've got pictures of them, and people go see them. You can go in these various churches in there. How do you do with?
So what do you do with all that? Right. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, I think those are excellent questions. I think it it comes back to now some of that, like, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Let's just talk about that for just a second, because there's been scholarship done on that, that goes back pretty far, that points in the direction of this being the proper site. That has some. So you connect that to Constantine and so on. Because a lot of the stuff connected with Constantine, people look at kind of suspiciously, like it seemed to begin here, like the Mount Sinai at the St. Catherine's Monastery. That's when that sort of begins. That tradition seems to begin there. As far as I know, you can't seem to get back further beyond that, right? So that's a frustration because you run into a wall. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre seems to have a very strong set of evidence in his favor, and some archaeology, and the Edicule was opened in the last few years, where they were able to do some scientific testing. Yeah. See, that's where, when you get a matrix of evidence, then you can take the tradition, and if it starts pointing more in a direction, then the tradition looks like it may actually be legitimate. Now, you take something like these pieces of wood that are scattered in these churches. What do you do with that? Like, how do you vet where the wood came from? Is there a historical trail of evidence? How far back does it go? Can you carbon date the wood, or is it too contaminated from people touching it? That seems to me to be a much more difficult type of proposition. Yeah. So each case, I mean, obviously, you want to be very careful about relic worship, idolatry, and that's the human condition. You mentioned Calvin before. He said our hearts are idol factories. We'll worship anything. Yeah. And that includes relics.
Do you think that was kind of, and it's something I actually want to learn more about, but when Catholicism started under Constantine, does it kind of feel like they were trying, I've heard lots of people say that they were trying to combine the religions of the time and combine Christianity, and then you ended up with things like, well, we got to have these relics because we need to have things for people to venerate. That's a way of generating income. Yeah. I mean, I can't claim to know a lot about that early history, but the danger of syncretism has always been a danger to the church. It was a danger to the Israelites. They mixed their religion with Canaanite religion. Yeah. And the results were catastrophic. Well, the church is subject to the same thing. I mean, whether it's Darwin, whether it's secular worldview claims, or whether it's relics or man-made constructs, there's always this danger of us getting away from the purity of the truth of God's revealed word. Because it appeals to people want something tangible. I think that's in a way it's understandable. Like, I can hold this thing. I mean, we see that in archaeology. People our volunteers go out in the field, and it's the most exciting thing in the world to find something. It's like treasure hunting, right? So there's something there, digging up the past, connecting to the Bible. You could physically touch it.
It they call the Holy Land the fifth gospel, and so there's that part of us that connects in a way to the past that I think there's something to that's good. Yeah. And then, but our hearts are corrupted by sin. And then, so it's so often we'll turn to idolatry. So these pieces of wood or other relics, if you can't vet them or you can't take them back so far, you have to be really careful about claiming that you have something from the cross of Jesus, for example.
Well, and also, do they hold any power? Because I feel like not only these pieces of the cross, but also relics related to saints of the Catholic Church. Yes. Can't you, touch them and pray, and somehow, some people believe you can receive something from in return. Yeah. That's a danger.
Yeah, it is. It's theologically it's dangerous, because, and again, it's connecting to something in the real world. So there's an understanding of it. But again, what is that? Is it about? You reminded me when you were saying this. It might sound like I'm off base here, but I'll make the connection. We had the temple in Jerusalem. That's where you went to worship. And Jesus said, Jesus meets a woman at the well, and she talks about how the Samaritans had the temple up on the mountain. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain.
On a different mountain.
Yeah, it was a different mountain up in Shechem, right? So they built their own temple, the Gerizim temple up on Mount Gerizim. Okay. To worship, and they had their alternate religious system. The Samaritans did. she mentions this to Jesus, and then he tells her, people won't need to worship on this mountain or in Jerusalem, but in spirit and truth, I think is how it goes, or it's something quite like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, you don't need this tangible thing to worship the one true God.
Yeah.
So in the past, we did have a temporal place that we went to. The temple, this tangible thing. It's no longer necessary. And I think in the same way, and the temple could have become an object of idol worship in itself. Is it about the temple or the God who dwells in the temple?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So even the temple
Yeah.
is only a mechanism that God is using, right?
Yeah.
So I'll connect these
Mm-hmm.
up here as soon as I can. The point I'm getting at is this temptation to associate our worship with God or getting to God in some way through some created construct.
Mm-hmm.
And it works itself out in all these different kinds of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I would be fascinated if I was holding a piece of wood that was really the cross of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That would be powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But to what degree
Mm-hmm.
and to what end? And does it confer anything upon me as a person?
Mm-hmm.
The answer to that is no.
Mm-hmm.
And if we think it does, then that bleeds over into, I think, being really problematic.
Mm-hmm.
We want to avoid any of that. And I don't know in terms of those kind of things, or you and I were talking before the show about the crown of thorns.
Yeah.
Is another one, right? There's a tradition where they have it in a something about that.
I was surprised a couple years ago when it caught on fire, and it's this tragic thing. This however old, when it was built, 800s, or I'm not sure exactly when Notre Dame was built, but when it started catching on fire, they were showing in the news that all these guys who sacrificed themselves or they endangered themselves to go in and rescue all the relics that were stored in the church.
The flames swept through Notre Dame Cathedral so intensely, it's a miracle anything inside survived. And one of the cathedral's most sacred relics, the crown of thorns believed to have been worn by Jesus Christ, was saved by Paris Fire Brigade chaplain Jean-Marc Fournier.
And I'm like, wait, they've got the crown of thorns? And then you start looking it up.
I had never heard that before.
Yeah, and so I looked it up a little bit, and the main tradition goes back to around in the 1200s, where I've got it right here. In 1238, Baldwin II, who is the Latin emperor of Constantinople, needed money, so he had the crown of thorns. And then there's in the literature, there's a tradition that goes back that it's written that this is a relic that had been venerated back to around the year 400, in the 400s, something like that. Okay. But definitely 1238 is when it becomes more solid, because it's there, and he makes this exchange and sells it to Louis IX of France because Baldwin needs money. And so at that point, that's when France gets it through. I think it was the Venetians held it as collateral for something, but it eventually, pretty soon after that, it gets to France, and that's how eventually it gets to be stored in Notre Dame.
Interesting.
One of the other things that I found really interesting is that in Western art, in paintings, oil paintings, it was around that time in the 1200s when you started seeing Jesus depicted on the cross, being crucified and having the crown of thorns on. And we wouldn't bat our eyes twice, because you've seen that a million times, and all these pictures of Jesus. Yeah, of course he's got the crown of thorns. It says that in the Bible. Well, before that point, in the art world, in frescoes, paintings, Jesus didn't have the crown of thorns on. And so if you dig a little bit, and you can find this yourself if you look it up, they actually began to commission works
with the crown of thorns on him, on the cross.
They paid painters to have it on because they wanted to generate tourism, basically, revenue for the church, revenue for the country. And so now we have this tradition where we think of it as, oh, of course Jesus has the crown of thorns on. Prior to that, there wasn't a tradition of him being crucified with it on.
Yes.
And if you look in the text, it actually doesn't say that he had it on it. Of course, it says that they put it on him when he was beaten, and then they dressed him up and they mocked him. But it doesn't say that. Well, it doesn't say that he took it off. It doesn't say that he kept it on. So we don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, based on the biblical text, he may have had it on. He may not have.
Yes.
See, it's interesting. I never thought about that before.
But our modern view of this white dude on a cross with a crown in a very poetic scene. Depicted in artwork, it's, that's how we get in where it may have looked, very different.
Well, I think that kind of like investigation is interesting. Like, I think it illustrates the point that we've been getting at is like, see, the Christian art is part of the investigation because the depictions are there spread through the period of time. I mean, you see that with I don't mean to shift subjects too much, but back to the Shroud of Turin, part of the historical argument trying to trace the shroud back is depictions in Christian artwork, pictures of Jesus that closely reflect, and we have this stuff on our website, look very much like what you see in the shroud. So you see a picture, a painting of Jesus's hands crossed down by his groin area. That's exactly what it looks like in the Shroud of Turin. So how did that get into this early Christian artwork? So the argument is we have like this continuity of evidence going on between the two. So maybe they were making paintings because they were familiar with the shroud, right, is the way that the argument goes. Now, you would have to bring other historical pieces of information to justify that. I'm only bringing that up because you mentioned the artwork. Here we have the crown of thorns, and we have this like line of demarcation in the art where it doesn't show up before that. That would probably go against the idea that this crown of thorns is really the crown of thorns.
Or one in a plus column for one version or another. Because it does seem to have a tradition that goes back further beyond, but there certainly was this transaction that happened at.
And my only point is not to discredit it because I don't know enough about it, but only to say that evidence has to be weighed carefully. Again, all of these artifacts, we have to keep them in their proper place in terms of idolatry. That's really the relic part of it is the important spiritual part of it. But as historical, archaeological, scientific matter, they're all worthy of investigation, I think. But I think there's a lot of caution that has to be taken.
If you look it up, there's all of these artifacts related to the crucifixion of Jesus.
Didn't you say there was like 4 spears? Or 4 claimed spears?
So the spear, the Holy Lance, or the Spear of Destiny, that there's like 4 claimed things. So that's the spear that pierced him in the side. There's one that's probably more prominent than the others, but there's 4. It's either 4 pieces in 4 different churches, or there's 4 claims to having the spear. But if you look at, just even Wikipedia, you look at this long list, of relics associated with Jesus. I don't think that no one actually has the Holy Grail. That would be, I'm trying to remember if that's the one or not. But there's the cross, there's the nails, there's the thorns, there's the plaque. There's someone claims to have. Oh, let me pull up a sec. Oh, the Holy Chalice. That's the the Holy Grail.
Holy Grail. Yep.
There's the Holy Coat, the Iron Crown of Lombardy, the Holy Lance, the Holy Sponge.
I never heard of that one before.
Yeah, well, Saint Croce of Gerusalemme in Rome. That's the church that has the Holy Sponge. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that is claimed, but then you brought up the Shroud of Turin, and like I kind of feel
that would seem to fit in the
that would seem to fit. It would
seem that way. Yeah.
But I feel like that one has quite a bit more evidence, and you brought it up. But I know that we've actually done an episode of Digging for Truth TV on it. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes if you want to watch more about that. But what else can you say about the Shroud of Turin? Because that definitely feels like it's in a different category.
Yeah, I would start by saying that I think it is, not because the nature of the claim of what it is, but because of the evidence in its totality. And now when I first joined ABR, we had a couple staff members, one staff member in particular, Rick Lancer, who had written about it and was convinced that, it has a pretty strong evidence that it could be the burial shroud of Jesus.
Even though the carbon dating says, and the scientific community says that it isn't. And
yes,
I'm bringing stuff up. I know that we had kind of addressed that in the
show,
in the TV episode, but
yes, but that's important. The point is that all of that evidence has to be evaluated.
Yeah,
somebody comes out and says they tested it. The date's way late. It's 1200. It's no way. It can't be the burial cloth of Jesus. Well, then, people push back on that and discover that the patch that they had taken the sample from was had been patched into the shroud at a later period of time, so the carbon date was way off. So it's that kind of thing. But that took years to work itself out.
Okay.
So let's say you believe that the shroud was the authentic shroud. Now in 1988, all of a sudden they say, no, it's 1200 AD.
Yeah.
You're a bunch of idiots. We're scientists. We tested at carbon-14. And as far as I know, there's nothing wrong with the tests themselves. Like the carbon-14 test is accurate. Well, then it took years for people to dig into, well, what happened with the test and where was it sampled from? And they found out that the date was right, but it was taken from this part of the shroud that was a repair that was added later. So how do you figure that out? How did they make that mistake? Well, I don't know how they made it, but it's an example of, it takes years sometimes to have counter arguments that go against each other, competing ideas that are out there. So, but as far as the shroud goes, when I first came to the ministry and Rick had written about it, I was very skeptical. Probably you just would consider me your typical hard-headed Protestant. It's just a Catholic relic. Worship relic. What are we doing with that? But then as I sort of said, okay, when I started with ABR, I trust the ministry. Let's see where this goes. And then I started, reading the stuff that our friend John Long wrote. Has written a lot of stuff, and he was on the TV show as the gentleman who was our guest. And the historical evidence, tracing it back, the artwork that I mentioned before, the scientific testing. I mean, can you think of an artifact that's been subjected to more critical review than the Shroud of Turin? I mean, I don't think there's anything that's been. And so after a while, I started to think, my own conclusion at this point is it's definitely a candidate. It is not fake. It is a candidate. Now, I'm not sure if it's the burial shroud of Jesus, but I think it could be. One of the reasons is...
And the question becomes, then what is it? Like, how did they get to that image on there? Like, there's still a debate about...
Right, and that's all part of, the argumentation that goes along with it is, how do we know if it's not the shroud, how was this thing created? And when was it created and who created it and how could they have done it with the technology that they had at the time? These are all legitimate questions, The thing that intrigued me was the images of the flowers. And again, you could see this analysis on our website and a little bit on our TV show. And the pollen, points to Israel. And early, like some of it first century. So when you see that and you're seeing these scientific arguments being made that this artifact has evidence attached to it that takes it all the way back or close to that time period, you start going, wait a minute. If it goes back that far, there might be something to this. So, but the whole, it's this whole picture that I was mentioning earlier of evidence. Now, I'm just going to say up front for our listeners, I'm not an expert on the Shroud of Turin. It's not something I've investigated fully. But sort of like it's interesting because as I work in the ministry, there's certain subjects that I consider myself to be pretty well rehearsed on. Others that I really like, that are interesting, that I pursue. And then by osmosis, there's other things I'm exposed to that I just don't have time to investigate myself. And this is one of them.
Okay.
But I know a good argument when I hear one. I think that's kind of, so I would encourage people, if you're thinking about the Shroud of Turin, go to our website and just check out the information. I'm not trying to, convert anybody to whether it's authentic. My interest is, and I think our interest is, good historical, scientific, archaeological research. And if there's a good argument to be made for something, it should be pursued. The counterexample, like the thorns, you trace it back in a tradition, but it kind of hits a dead end. What can you do with it? You can't do much with it. So you got to be really careful what you claim about it. And even I would say, John Long, who I mentioned before, he's been studying the shroud for 40 years. He's still careful in his public presentations about not being dogmatic that this is the shroud. He's convinced it's the shroud, but he's not dogmatic about it. So
for the person who's listening, what should be their takeaway? There's relics that exist that claim to be these things. There's other mysteries that haven't been found, but people claim that they have found them, but there's no evidence that they found them. What's the takeaway for someone who's listening?
Yeah, that's good. I think I think a couple of principles. First, I would say when somebody's making a claim, check it against the biblical text, because sometimes people claim things either for or against the Bible that the text actually doesn't tell us. Okay. It doesn't say that. It's not exactly what I'm saying, but your point earlier was the biblical text actually doesn't demand that Jesus was wearing the crown of thorns on the cross itself.
Yeah.
Now, I never noticed that before until you brought it up.
Mm-hmm.
So the text is where the authority is. It's God speaking. So we got to get that right first. What does it claim? What doesn't it claim? And then what theory can fit within that circle?
Yeah.
So that's the first principle. And then the second main principle is, test everything, hold on to the good, as Paul says. Don't jump the gun on discoveries that look sensational, that get you excited, that vindicate the Bible. You're living in a world that's against the Christian faith, and in the West, a society that's becoming more and more hostile. You want to hold on to something that vindicates your position, your faith, your belief in Christ and the authority of Scripture and in God and all those things. But if you grab onto something that is wrong, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help the church.
Mm-hmm.
So archaeological, historical, relics, all these things, in the end, have a sort of a tentative nature to them, to varying degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some things are closer to certain than others, but in the end, the only thing that is certain for certain is the revelation of God and the gospel. So, caution, wisdom, test everything, hold on to the good. The other principles from the Proverbs, I'm going to paraphrase badly here. If you hear one side of the story, it sounds good until you hear the other side of the story.
Yeah. The first to present his case.
His case. You're doing a much better job. My translation is so bad it should be thrown out. But I think people get the point is, where you have to, somebody gives a case and it sounds good until you hear other sides of the story. So always be careful. And even with our ministry, we believe we're trustworthy. We're trying to be trustworthy. We're trying to be faithful and correct in what we do and what we say and what we argue. But we would encourage you to be like Bereans. Double check what we say too, because you're ultimately responsible to God for what you believe and what you say. So that would be my advice. I hope that's a good thumbnail sketch.
That's really good. I think we should all listen to that. And for those of us that like to investigate these things and wonder and, oh, I didn't know about that, and just to, be cautious. I think that's a good word.
Yep. Amen.
So be cautious, everyone, when you see stuff like this come across the news. Not everything is real, and not everything is fake news. So just be cautious. As always, we'll put a few links in the show notes if you want to do some further reading on some of these things. And also, if you've been enjoying this podcast and some of the stuff that we've discussed, go ahead and leave us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. They help the algorithm or whatever get the podcast recommended to others that might be interested and help people find it. And if you're not enjoying it, then maybe don't leave us a review. So it looks like, everyone thinks we're awesome. Until next time.
Digging for Truth is a presentation of the Associates for Biblical Research. To find out more about ABR, just go to BibleArchaeology.org.